Welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're here because today we're taking a classic textbook story, the one we all learned in school, and just completely flipping it on its head. If you dig back into your memory, you probably remember a super simple narrative about the origins of Native Americans, right? Basically, a group of ancient folks walked across a frozen land bridge, and, well, that was pretty much it. But thanks to some absolute game changers in modern DNA analysis, we now know that story isn't just a little incomplete, it fundamentally misses the massive, dynamic reality of human history. So we're going to use the latest genetic data to map out exactly who the ancestors of Native Americans really were. And trust me, it is a wild ride.
Okay, let's dive right in. The classic myth paints a picture of a simple, one-way hiking trip from East Asia across the Bering Strait and straight down into the Americas. But the reality? It's so much cooler. Ancient human migration was absolutely not a straight line. The genetic data actually reveals this vast, swirling network over tens of thousands of years. We're talking about populations moving from East Asia up to the north, Siberia down to the south, from Beringia into the Americas, and get this, even from the Americas back up into the Arctic. It wasn't a single migration. It was a massive, pulsing network of human movement.
Because of all this complex movement, we really have to establish a crucial baseline here. Native Americans are not simply East Asians. Now, to be fair, the old theory isn't entirely wrong. They definitely share ancestry. But framing it that simply, it's wildly insufficient. The genetic evidence actually proves that the ancestors of Native Americans branched off from East Asian populations way back, around 36,000 years ago. And after that split, they didn't just immediately march south. They actually spent thousands of years up in Beringia, that region connecting Siberia and Alaska, evolving uniquely and forming their own completely distinct population before ever stepping foot further south into the Americas. Which brings us to our first massive paradigm shift of this explainer. Section 1, the ancient North Eurasians. Now, what's really fascinating about this Annie population is the incredible genetic split it reveals. When scientists map out the DNA ancestry of Native Americans, it's broadly composed of two totally distinct ancient lineages. About 70 to 80% comes from that ancient East Asian lineage we just talked about. But here is the kicker. 20 to 30% comes from a completely different group known as the ancient North Eurasians. The exact percentages can wiggle a bit depending on the specific study or model, but the presence of this second, deeply ancient group is absolutely undeniable. So who exactly were these ancient North Eurasians? Let's carefully clarify this mind-blowing connection so it isn't misunderstood, because it's a big one. The ANE were a deeply ancient Eurasian group, and we need to be crystal clear right now, Native Americans were never European. That is a complete misunderstanding of how genetics work. Instead, the ANE were a very old foundational population from way back before Europeans and Asians distinctly split from each other. This ancient Siberian group eventually contributed genetics to both the ancestors of Native Americans and to some modern Europeans. So it simply means they share a very, very distant ancient Siberian ancestor. And we actually have the physical, tangible proof of this. 24,000. That is exactly how many years ago a specific individual known to scientists as the Malta boy lived in Siberia. The discovery and DNA sequencing of his 24,000-year-old remains was a massive breakthrough. It served as the ultimate genetic proof of this ancient North Eurasian lineage. Essentially, he's the physical anchor proving that this ancient ghost population really existed and passed their DNA down the branching vines of the human family tree. Now that we've looked north to Siberia, let's shift our focus to the east. Section 2, distant cousins, the Jomon. Because of some really striking similarities in ancient artifacts and certain physical traits, a very common misconception often pops up. People ask, did the ancient Japanese Jomon people actually build boats and migrate to the Americas? It's a super tantalizing idea, right? It sounds plausible. But the hard genetic data allows us to definitively answer this with a solid no. They absolutely did not. Let's trace back and see what the relationship actually is. If we trace these ancestral branches backward, it all starts to make perfect sense. You have to think of the Jomon and Native Americans not as parent and child, but as distant cousins. Tens of thousands of years ago, they had a shared ancestor, the ancient East Eurasians. Over time, that original group split. The western branch of that split eventually became the Jomon lineage in Japan, Meanwhile, the eastern branch moved through Northeast Asia, up into Beringia, and eventually became the ancestors of Native Americans. So they definitely share a very ancient root, but they developed on completely separate parallel branches of the family tree. To really grasp how this all happened, we need to zoom out a bit. Section 3, the ancient globalization. We really used to think of ancient migration as these single, isolated, one-and-done events, but modern science just keeps shattering that illusion. Take a cutting-edge 2026 genomic study of South America, for example. It showed that migration there involved multiple, overlapping waves of people, and even uncovered a totally new Asian ghost population, whose DNA had been hidden in the historical record this whole time. It just goes to show that the history of human migration is continuously found to be radically more complex than those simplistic one-wave models of the past. We really need to ditch the myth that ancient people just sat around in static, isolated villages for thousands of years doing nothing. Honestly, just like today, the ancient world was absolutely full of movers and shakers. You had merchants trading along massive river systems, sailors navigating treacherous coastlines, nomads crossing vast, endless steppes. There were refugees fleeing conflicts, and highly skilled artisans moving to booming new settlements to ply their trades. If you think about it, they were basically the ancient equivalents of modern-day expats, international students, and a globalized workforce. Humans have literally always been on the move. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how profound an impact even a small group of moving people can have. You honestly don't need a massive invading army to completely change a population's DNA and culture. Imagine this. A tiny group of, say, maybe 1,000 immigrants arrives with some brand new high-tech knowledge. Let's use the Yayoi farmers entering Jomon, Japan as an example. They bring agriculture to an existing hunter-gatherer society of maybe 1 million people. Because of this radically new, reliable food technology, there is an absolute population boom among those adopting it. And just like that, within a few centuries, the genetics and culture of the entire region are permanently transformed, birthing a completely new cultural sphere from the ground up. When you start viewing things through this lens, you realize human history isn't a single event. It is a continuous, rolling series of technological and migratory waves. 30,000 years ago, it was massive waves of hunter-gatherers pushing into new territories. Then, 10,000 years ago, the wave of agriculture completely reshaped the globe. Fast forward to 3,000 years ago, and it's bronze and iron changing the game. And today? Well, today it's planes, the internet, and modern globalization. Each wave overlaps, mixes, and fundamentally reshapes the people of the world. Which all leads us to the absolute most important takeaway of this entire explainer. Section 4, rivers, not fixed boxes. I absolutely love this concept, and it sums up the science so perfectly. Think of ancient populations not as fixed boxes, but as a river, branching, merging, and branching again. For way too long, we've tried to shove human ethnicities into these neat, isolated little boxes. But the DNA proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that no modern group is a pure descendant of a single isolated ancient tribe. Every single one of us is the beautiful, complex result of thousands of years of flowing, blending, and constantly moving populations. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. If our shared ancestral history is truly a constant flowing river of migration and mixing, if the Native Americans, the Japanese, Europeans, and literally all of us share these deep intertwining roots, how should that change the way we view today's modern borders and ethnicities? It's a pretty profound reality to ponder, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep questioning those simple stories.